Hi, good morning, and today is the 12th of September 2021, and this is a look back at the week starting the 5th of September 2021. So every week we do a sort of end of the week vlog and podcast, and even though we do a special on Thursdays at 8 a.m. London time, especially for our ZP Developer Zone members, we do a sort of slightly lighter, more, let's say, newsy webinar for our, just really for the news from Zimmer people this week. I'm slightly laughing to myself because we have moved the webinar forward by 12 hours, and it's a little early in some parts of Europe because it is Sunday, and I see Saran is online, so thank you, Saran, for joining us this morning. We'll sort of do the webinar as per normal, but I'm not expecting a huge turnout this morning. I think a lot of people will be a little bit caught out that we have actually moved the webinar. So let me sort of jump into it a little bit, and just to say that we're also putting this webinar out as a podcast as well. So in a couple of days time we'll post through our sort of social media channels that this is also a podcast. The reason that we're also doing it as a podcast is we did get some nice feedback from our quality manager, and she said, oh yeah, I'd like it in a podcast format. And I had been doing it in a podcast format, but when somebody sort of really showed a genuine interest in listening to the podcast, and I thought, okay, we'll revive this. So just to let people know, or to let you know, and you can let other people know that if they're busy, and I think people generally are, they don't have to watch this. They can just have it playing in the background, also as a podcast, and that'll be online later on. Just for a little bit of sort of interest, I know that many of you do follow our ZP Developer Zone webinar, as I say, 8 a.m. every Thursday. We did talk about something called MIPS this week, molecular imprinted polymers. I won't go back over it deeply now, but MIPS are kind of interesting because essentially you do a process called electropolymerization. So you take a monomer and you polymerize it on the surface of the electrode by passing a current, and you do it in the presence of a template. So as this polymer polymerizes, it's forming pores or holes around a template, and later on you wash the template away, so you're left with these holes. So I know that one company, for example, is using MIPS for looking at SARS-CoV-2. So you could use it for viruses. I know people use it for bacteria. Hi Ahmed, nice to see you. Ahmed, it's nice to have you online. Just out of interest, Saran's online as well, and he's one of our engineers. So just FYI. But yeah, we did a big bit about MIPS this week, and so we just put a little note up about MIPS because people were asking, how do I get started with MIPS? What electrode should I use for MIPS? So we just put a little sort of little bit of a note up about MIPS, because we do have a paper out about it, and we do recommend the gold electrodes for it. So that was just something that we talked about this week in our ZP Developer Zone webinar. So moving on a little bit, this was sort of at Zimmer and Peacock, we've taken on a new site, and as part of that we've been developing some new technologies, and one of them is microbiosensors. So essentially these are what's called microelectrodes. Microelectrodes, by their name, they're very small. I mean, these particular electrodes are made from 50 micrometer diameter wire. They're quite short in length. These ones are about 0.5 millimeter long. So you have a very tiny electrode. Now, electrodes like this, an area that's often used them is neurosciences. People have been putting these kind of electrodes, unfortunately, into brain slices and doing things like doing analysis with that. So at ZP, we're sort of interested in much more broad applications, but we do have these microelectrodes, and so I have a picture. Unfortunately, if you're following the podcast, you can't see a picture of it, but they're essentially glass capillaries with electrodes in the glass capillary, and then we functionalize the glass capillary to be a biosensor. Now I will talk a little bit more about that as well, but just a bit of news from Zimmer Peacock that we do have a new type of sensor or new configuration. Just for your interest as well, ZP, we do have a nitrate sensor in development. It's extremely well let's say characterized. It's very robust. There's a lot of engineering has gone into it, so it's not just it's not an R&D effort. This is a serious commercial effort. But we just put some pictures up there this week because we do have this new site in a place called Coventry in the UK, and just very lucky because the University of Warwick has a big sort of, let's say, horticultural centre where they have these, I would say sort of acres of glass houses, where they're obviously, growing crops and doing R&D essentially on the growing of crops. And actually I think this would be quite interesting to surround that. They have these massive greenhouses where they grow chilies in there and strawberries and all sorts of fruits. And so we went along there this week just to have a look. This is me, obviously standing in the greenhouses. But it's a very good opportunity for ZP because if we can develop a nitrate sensor, and we are developing it for agricultural uses, then be able to get at these or get into these large greenhouses and interact with this university will be really interesting. So that was a sort of trip that myself and 3 engineers, Emma, Clarice and Greg, all went on this week. And so I thought that was sort of interesting to report back on that. I did mention it, but I will. I didn't go into it too quickly earlier on, but we have made some microelectrodes for ZP, and if you're interested in them a bit deeper, there is a web page on it, and in there on that web page, we do have some sketches about the electrodes themselves, so you can get a sense of the dimensions and what they actually let's say contain. We have glucose sensors and lactate sensors and sort of choline sensors and all sorts of sensors in this configuration, and we have a starter kit as well. So I slightly different news now as well. I suppose I said that within the UK we went to what's the advantage of microelectrodes when we are using them? I think the advantage of microelectrodes is really for some applications the volume is maybe very small, so I'm thinking microelectrodes might be particularly useful in very small cell culture experiments where you really don't, a lot of our electrodes, especially the screen printed electrodes, even though they're small, they might be sometimes bigger than the experiment itself. So I think the advantage of microelectrodes is, if the experiment or the sample is very, very small, you can get this tiny little essentially wire into the experiment. That's an advantage. I think that in the broader community, people are literally taking sort of slices of tissue and putting the sensor right in a specific region. So even though the screen printed electrodes are small, there's a whole series of experiments that are much smaller again, and then the microelectrodes are super useful then. Now, just for your interest, microelectrodes have a higher current density than macroelectrodes. So per area, the signal is actually higher. And this is due to something called hemispherical diffusion rather than planar diffusion. So I don't want to jump into that yet now because we could sort of talk about that in the ZP developer zone. But microelectrodes, I think the main advantage for microelectrodes is you can get the sensor into an area or material that's quite small. Just as an interest, they have a technical feature which means that the current density is higher, but I think that's more, that's nice to have, but it's not why I would go for microelectrodes. I would go for a microelectrode if I had a very small sample and I couldn't, I literally couldn't get my screen printed electrodes into that sample because it was too small. Cell cultures would be an example. Examining tissue would be an example. So, Ahmet, thanks for the question, and that's when I would use them. I said that we did one trip this week when we went to the University of Warwick. This is just a bit of news that I think at the University of Oslo, they've kind of opened up a sort of biology makers lab where students will work on projects. And so Solran and Sindre went to, that's two of our engineers, went to support that and listen to the talks this week. So I suppose we've been out and about twice this week, once to the University of Warwick and then once to the University of Oslo, which kind of reflects, that ZP is, active or highly active in at least two countries. That's the UK and UK and Norway. And if we're not global in the next few years, which we already are global, but very significantly global, I would be very sorry for that. And then just lastly, we're very good friends with a company called Ampexhale. They've really got the world's only, let's say, test for monitoring COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And then unfortunately, when SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 came along, they pivoted their business and they've started to detect SARS-CoV-2 on the breath. And they actually have a scientific paper out there. So I know, Ahmet, this might be interesting to you. If you're following on the vlog, I'm showing the paper at the moment. I mean, the paper is free to access, which is, really nice. And then they talk about the paper or the work that they're doing there. So just to sort of sum up this week, that a new paper from Exhalation Technologies or Exhalation Health about the measurement of SARS-CoV-2 is out, and it's a nice one because it's essentially free to access online. So if I was just to do a quick roundup this week, thank you guys for making it to this earlier presentation. I think it'll catch a few people out this evening because unfortunately we moved it from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. But if I was just to kind of summarize for this week, just tell people that there'll also be a podcast available based on this vlog. We did discuss MIPS this week, molecular imprinted polymers, and we did make a recommendation on the type of electrodes you can use for MIPS. We also talked about the microbiosensors, which are super useful, especially when in applications where the sample size is very small. I think it's probably worth saying that transdermal sensors, these glucose sensors that essentially go through the skin, these are also really a form of microbiosensor. The reason that they're useful in that application is because if you're going to stick something through your skin, you want it to be as small and as painless as possible. So there are applications where the sample is small, or maybe you don't want to cause, as much pain to the patient, and there the microbiosensor makes a lot more sense. Now you can start having a conversation between microneedles, nanoneedles, and microbiosensors. So there's all sorts of formats. Ahmet, I know you're very interested in electronics, so I think the fact that we're doing this nitrate monitoring might be super useful to you or super interesting to you, and we're doing that. We're doing it, and we visited the University of Warwick this week. We did to put some data sheets out about the microbiosensors, so have a look at that. And then thanks to the engineers who visited the University of Oslo, so we're hoping to do some student projects with the students there. And that'll be part of our sort of recruitment strategy. And then just finally, as I said, well done to Exhalation for the continuing commercialization of their SARS-CoV-2 detection on the breath. Okay, well, thanks very much. Just a quick one this week, but if you're more technically interested in Zimmer & Peacock, please join our ZP Developer Zone. Don't forget that we do have the ZP Academy as well, where there's free learning material. If you've got any questions of ZP, please reach out to us. And thanks very much. And I shall speak to you all soon. All right, take care. Bye-bye.